What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, before I get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week on YouTube. Good show in store for you today. Going to talk some NWSL, look at how things are progressing at the halfway point of the regular season. Going to look back one final time on the European season now that the Champions League is over. Winners and losers. That's all coming up. But first, one of the bigger transfer window dominoes has fallen officially. This was reported earlier, but Real Madrid have actually unveiled Jude Bellingham as their newest signing. Of course, one of the most sought-after players that seem likely to get a move this summer, and he does. It is to Real Madrid. Nothing surprising about this, but now that's official, I do want to talk about what it means. The beginning of this transfer window, Real Madrid started, or if you want to call it this summer, trying to catch Barcelona with an aging core. I am really tired of trying to frame, I've talked about this all the time, but I'm bringing it up again because it's a Real Madrid conversation, trying to frame Real Madrid's season around the Champions League rather than what happened in La Liga, where they were not competitive. They are behind Barcelona right now. Does that mean Barcelona have a better chance of winning next season's Champions League? No. But they have to catch Barcelona. Look at the gap between the two teams in the league. Real Madrid almost didn't even finish second. You can't be an undisputed top 2, top 3 team in the world and not be competitive in your own league. That's not how this works. And, right, we're talking about the Benzema, Modric, Kroos, you can go down the list. Of course, Real Madrid have exciting young players. I'm going to get to them next. But it's not like you can bring this group back next season and go, I'm optimistic things are going to end differently. That it's going to be better, right? This is not a team that is growing. This is a team of incredibly accomplished veterans who are on the downturn. So you have to find ways to elevate the talent and improve your squad this summer if you are going to have a different situation in the league next season and be more competitive. That's what Jude Bellingham does for you. He is already one of the best midfielders in the world. He is only going to get better. And so now what you have with the things that have already happened this summer, early in this transfer window, is you have probably the best core of midfielders moving forward in the world from a long-term perspective, with Camavinga, Tchouaméni, and Bellingham. And I have said before, Camavinga needs to be playing in midfield. He's not a left back. That's part of the flaws that Real Madrid have right now and why they needed to improve this squad. He's not a left back. He shouldn't be playing there. He doesn't want to play there. You're not at your best as a team if he's playing there. And so that's part of it, is you have your midfield set. Then you have a completely clean slate in attack, essentially. Benzema leaves. You said goodbye to some other players. So basically you have Rodrigo, Vinicius, and I would have to assume now Fede Valverde is also going to play higher up the field because you have 3 midfielders behind him. Those are 3 excellent attackers who you can obviously grow with for the next 5 to 10 years. And then you get to go add around them and find other ways, difference makers off the bench, all that kind of stuff. So that's 6 players, and I didn't mention Kroos. I didn't mention Modric. You have a team moving forward now that looks so much better because of what Bellingham gives you and the way it kind of fills everything out. So then when you need a goal late, you can bring on Modric. Cruz can obviously, you don't have to start that same trio every single game. But you have so much of this moving forward. And that's the last part of this that I want to touch on real quickly. There is a difference in the outlook for next season and the long-term future of Real Madrid. Should they be better next season? Yes. If for no other reason than it's hard for me to believe they're going to be worse, and you just added Jude Bellingham. So they're right up there with the favorites to win the Champions League, of course. Am I convinced that this puts them on the same level as Barcelona? We're going to have to see how this summer goes and what Barcelona's financial situation allows them or prevents them from doing. There are a lot of question marks there. And also what Real Madrid do. If you add Harry Kane into this mix, or Mbappe with the mess that's now going on at PSG with his future, obviously we're having a different conversation. And that's the kind of things that you open yourself up for with all of the departures that have happened. But what you have, even if those two signings don't come to fruition, and so you're looking at next season's team, a bunch of really good players. Obviously, you've got world-class talent, Vinicius, Jude Bellingham, but it's not on the same level as a Manchester City, as a Bayern, I guess. There just aren't that, admittedly, there aren't that many teams outside of Manchester City at this point. Now, if Neymar and Mbappe stay at PSG, maybe you throw PSG in that mix. The point being, it doesn't make them this clear favorite next season. But boy, are they set up for the future. And you got to believe they're going to get another piece at some point. Whether that's Mbappe, whether that's a striker down the line in another season or two. The outside backs need improvement. There are ways this team needs to still get better to, for me, be considered one of, on the very, very short list of best teams in the world. Because to me, they're not there right now. Of course, they're one of the 10 best, probably one of the best 5, certainly can win the Champions League. But last season's run felt different. And they don't win La Liga when there are other teams that actually give them a good challenge. And so, what you have, now that you have 3 of the best young midfielders in the world, 2 of the best young attackers in the world, you have the foundation for another truly great team that you can look at and go, maybe they can't be Manchester City just because of the finances, but you'll take them over everybody else, just from a pure squad construction standpoint. And I will continue to argue that has not been the case the past few seasons, at least. Maybe even I would argue in the post-Ronaldo era entirely. But especially once Benzema went from being a Ballon d'Or winner to another good striker. They needed more firepower, needed more talent. Jude Bellingham is the start of that. They're going to be really, really good consistently now with this core group. And these are the kind of players you can build the best team in the world around. The question is, what else do you do this summer and how does that impact next season? Because that Barcelona team is going to be pretty similar. I'm not betting against Lewandowski. We're not talking about, right? It's a different conversation. We're talking in the next 5 years. Which team do I expect to be more successful? Because I love where this Real Madrid team is going. It's just going to be a process to build another team of guys in their prime where you go, wow, look at all those names. I think that's part of this. Is that the names were still there. And obviously Benzema had a terrific season 2 seasons ago. I know they won the Champions League. But think about how many times they came close to losing. Luka Modric, great player. Not the same guy he was 10 years ago. Toni Kroos, not the same guy he was 5 years ago, right? You had all these names, and slowly the names are leaving. The next group is coming. Vinicius, Rodrigo has entered himself into that conversation. Camavinga, Tchouaméni, now Jude Bellingham. I'm just still pumping the brakes on next season until we see what this squad looks like when it's built. Because it's going to be a big summer of transition. Like I said, your attack is basically gone outside of the two guys you obviously want to keep that are going to be foundational pieces. So who are the other players that come in? Because there is work to be done to catch Barcelona. But the first step in that, and the first step in making sure that this is a top 3 team in the world, one of the favorites entering the Champions League every season, is getting Jude Bellingham, getting that deal done, and making sure he doesn't go to the Premier League, he doesn't go to Manchester City. Real Madrid got that. There's just not much to say about Bellingham. He's sensational. It's a massive signing. So I want to talk more about the implications of it, because obviously every team in the world wants him, and Real Madrid lucky enough to make that official. Going to switch gears here a little bit. It is time to do an NWSL check-in. I kind of did this with Major League Soccer a couple weeks ago. It's the halfway point of the NWSL regular season, so that makes it a perfect time. European season is now over, so kind of shifting focus to MLS, NWSL, and summer competitions. So I'm just going to roll through all the teams and just kind of recap the season so far and a couple kind of big takeaways or things that to me are going to be storylines in the second half of the season. We're going to go from top to bottom, so starting with the San Diego Wave. You can see the table right in front of you. These are your 6 playoff teams right now, and then I've got another table with the teams trying to get into the playoffs. The San Diego team just gets better and better after starting so well last season. Really good defensively. Only 11 goals allowed. That's one off the league best. Jaden Shaw has really started to come into her own. Alex Morgan is still scoring goals, of course. So they've got some dynamic, not just Alex Morgan, but some dynamic attacking talent and a really good young player in Jaden Shaw who was just kind of getting integrated last season. That's one of the big upgrades you've seen in terms of taking that next step for this team is now she is not just a promising player with a lot of talent, she is a impact player game in and game out. And you're seeing that this season. The other thing I'll point out is they've played 7 road games. They've won 4 of them. So this is going to even come back around where they're going to be set up well with a bunch of home games in the second half of the season here. So they're in a really, really good spot. Naomi Gurman just signed a contract extension. I could talk about her all day long. They're in a really good spot for the long term and for right now as one of the best teams in the league right now at the top of the table. Tied on points are the Washington Spirit. I said in my season preview, I really expected this team to bounce back. I thought last season was just kind of a weird one. There was so much going on off the field that there was a really good argument with the amount of talent still on this roster that they were going to be right back in the playoffs and competing for a championship again. Didn't necessarily expect it to be because they're tied for the best defensive record in the league with 10 goals allowed. That's the big story here. The other part of this is Ashley Hatch is right up there near the top of the goal scoring charts. And yet, if you look at the underlying numbers, they suggest she could be even more productive, which is a really good sign for the Spirit. And by that, I mean she is blowing everybody else away in terms of expected goals plus assists per 90 minutes. As in, significantly more than Sophia Smith is creating for the Portland Thorns. So that suggests and specifically on the goal side of this, there are more goals to be had. The opportunities are being created. So you could even see improved production as good as Ashley Hatch has been. There's another level, at least it seems possible according to the numbers that she could reach. That if she just gets a little bit more clinical, we're talking about a couple extra goals that she can add to what she's already giving you. And the other part of this is Ashley Sanchez has 2 goals and no assists. The attack has not been as dynamic as it could be. It's been good enough, and defensively they've been excellent. And so I look at both of these teams, Washington and San Diego, for different reasons, but to say, I believe in this, one, and two, I believe they could be even better in the second half of the season and even more impressive by the time we get to the playoffs. The foundation is there, but there is still room to grow. San Diego, primarily because they've played so many road games. Washington, primarily because I think there's another gear this attack can find. That is still Ashley Hatch, Trinity Rodman, Ashley Sanchez. I will continue to believe in that trio. They've been really good so far. But there might just be a little bit more that you can get out of them in the second half of the season. That's really exciting if you're a Spirit fan. I mentioned them briefly. Portland Thorns are in third. There is no disputing who has the best attack in the league. You've got, of course, Sophia Smith, who is the best player in the league. You've got your typical contributors, your Morgan Weavers of the world. Crystal Dunn is back. Christine Sinclair is still doing her thing. Then you have the addition of Olivia Moultrie to give you another creative force. She has been really good in the minutes she's gotten. And there's also the reality that Crystal Dunn, Morgan Weaver, and Sophia Smith have scored more goals between the three of them than 5 of the 11 other teams in this league. They are clicking on all cylinders. It's not just Sophia Smith. So Sophia Smith is also, I believe, leading the league in assists. There just isn't much else to say. The question will be, can they do enough defensively? There is no doubt who's got the most attacking talent and the most well-balanced attack and the best player. I will always have a fear in knockout competitions, though, if you're trying to outscore everybody every single game. And that's not necessarily been the case, but they haven't been quite as good defensively as the two teams in front of them in the table right now. And that's why, despite all the goals they've scored, they're still a point behind. Now, it's early, they've got time to fix this, and it's not like they've been horrible defensively. But if you're poking a hole, that's what it is, because there's just nothing to say about them offensively. They're spectacular. Also on 19 points, OL Reign. First thing I want to recognize, OL Reign undefeated at home. Not the only team, but I thought it was significant to mention here because they have 5 home wins. Now, they've also played 7 home games. But they are picking up points at Lumen Field. The concern, to me, is a very simple one. You have goal scorers. Multiple goal scorers. Primarily Bethany Balser, Jordan Heidema. Those are also players who are poachers, finishers. Not kind of these complete balanced forwards like a Sophia Smith, where you're expecting to get goals and assists. They are goal scorers in the purest sense of the number 9. So that means you need people creating. And right now, Megan Rapinoe has 4 assists, and that's about all this team has gotten. In large part because Rose Lavelle has missed most of the season. So we're having a different conversation if Rose Lavelle is back healthy, ready to go when it matters in the playoffs. But for right now, that is what is holding this team back. And obviously, that's part of what Rose Lavelle gives you. This team was designed to have her, and Jess Fishlock can give you some of that as well. It just hasn't really happened yet this season. So you got the goal scorers. That's not the problem. But those goal scorers can only be so helpful if they don't have people creating chances for them. And it's got to be more than just Megan Rapinoe. That is my one holdup with OL Reign right now. Because I love this roster. It is stacked. It just seems like there's kind of this next level that you can talk yourself into them reaching, and they don't always do it for one reason or another, and injuries are certainly part of that and part of the story this season. Because they're doing just fine. They're 1 point off of the leaders. You add Rose Lavelle back into that conversation, they're right there among the favorites, maybe the favorite. But right now, that's not happening. How long does it actually take to get Rose Lavelle back? What does that look like? Those are all questions OL Reign are going to have to answer in the second half of the season. Right behind them, perhaps the story of the season so far, New York, New Jersey, Gotham. Gotham are 2 points back of San Diego and Washington, despite having one win at home, in large part because they are tied for the best defense in the league with 10 goals allowed. Again, this is another spot where it's really easy to find optimism. If they just start winning some home games, they're going to be right there. They are a playoff team. That much they've already proven. They've been really, really good. Question is, are they more than the playoff team? Can they host a playoff game? Those kind of things. A lot of it has to do with Lynn Williams, who has been really, really good. And then the other part of this is, outside of her, without Midge Purce, you just don't have a lot of attacking weapons that you can consistently rely upon. You've got all these options in midfield. That's fantastic. Defensively, they've been excellent. The next level for this, for me, is getting Midge Purce back and making sure you have her and Lynn Williams available and ready to go and playing well. That's how you go from being a playoff team to being a contender. Because you just can't rely on one person to carry the load. As good as Lynn Williams has been. So again, kind of like the Reign, they're just got to see what this all looks like and whether you get your full complement of players by playoff time. Because otherwise, I will have some concerns about how far they can go in the playoffs. Because Gotham are a playoff team. And it should be recognized that is an incredible statement to make this early in the season, and me be that confident in saying so, considering where this club has been for most of its existence, and certainly recently, as they've kind of tried all these different variations and all this turnover trying to get to this point, and finally have found the right combination from coach to squad, all of that stuff. So bravo to Gotham. Really excited to see what they can do the rest of this season. Hopefully Midge Purce is back soon and can stay healthy, and you've got your kind of two primary attackers, because you need that secondary option to take some of the pressure off of Lynn Williams. Speaking of carrying the attack, there is one player in the league with 7 goals. That is Caroline with the North Carolina Courage. She has 7, the team has 15. That's how vital she has been to their attack. I said this coming out of the Courage winning the Challenge Cup. Caroline is phenomenal. And you saw the raw potential, and now it's kind of all coming together. And I'm not surprised by this in the slightest. This is, to me, 100% legit. Just getting the opportunity to carry this team, and that's exactly what's happening. My concern here, similar to what I just talked about with Gotham, is where is your secondary dynamic attacker? To me, having somebody score half your goals is not really a sustainable formula. And it's also not a sustainable formula when you are kind of waiting to find even your primary creator. It's a different dynamic if Dabinia is still there. Maybe not scoring the goals, but being the focal point of the attack. Obviously, Dabinia no longer there. And so you're getting some contributions from other players, but it's one thing to be in the playoff conversation, which the Courage certainly have the ability to, and obviously are right now. It's another thing to be able to go beat the San Diegos, the Washingtons, the Portlands, the OL Reigns. And that's, to me, where this Gotham and North Carolina Courage conversation is. Not just can you make the playoffs, but do you have what it takes to make a playoff run? Where are we drawing this line in terms of contenders? Because certainly, to me, the top 4 are. Got to see about 5 and 6, but Courage off to a good start as well. Then you've got the bottom half of the league, starting with the Houston Dash as the last team looking into the playoff picture from the outside. Another team, 10 goals allowed, tied for the best defense in the league. Another team looking for help in attack. Maria Sanchez is the only player on this team with 3 or more goal involvements. That is the difference between your top teams who have Jaden Shaw and Alex Morgan, Trinity Rodman and Ashley Hatch, Sophia Smith and Crystal Dunn. OL Reign, same kind of story. And these other teams that have one player having a great season and then not getting enough around them. That's what it's going to come down to, right? They're a point back right now. To me, they're right there in that same conversation with the Courage. I do have Gotham as kind of I sort of view this as 4 contenders, a team I am very confident is going to make the playoffs, and then the teams competing for the last playoff spots and we'll call them the underdogs or teams that I don't really see making the playoffs. Houston definitely in that playoff conversation, just not closer to the Courage than Gotham for me. I know it's only a point difference right now, but I really do feel like Gotham is going to separate coming down the stretch here. But good start for Houston. Just got to see if you can find another attacking piece. Maybe somebody gets hot and that ends up being the difference to get you into the playoffs. After that, you have the Orlando Pride. Contributions from all kind of players, which is really exciting to see for a team that's gone through some turnover and not necessarily expecting too much from them this season. There have been some really good individual performances and kind of things to build off of from a personnel standpoint. At the same time, not scoring enough goals, less than one a game, and a -6 goal difference. This is kind of deceiving in terms of the table and what the eye test says is they have probably overachieved a little bit and just kind of, when they've lost badly, and when they've won close games, and that's not necessarily sustainable in terms of not just staying where they are, but making that jump to get into the playoff picture. Then you got Racing Louisville. Remarkably, only 2 of those 11 games are wins, and yet Louisville have a positive goal difference. It's +1, but it is still positive. Samantha DeMello has been really, really good. It's the same story here. Can you find a second player to really start complementing and clean things up defensively a little bit? They're just kind of average to good in every area. And you could argue they just have caught some bad breaks. If Orlando's been fortunate and kind of overachieving, you could argue Louisville's underachieving a little bit. You're also 5 points back of the last playoff spot with half the season gone. I do think the ceiling is definitely higher for this team in terms of, I do think, if you're asking me which one, Orlando or Louisville, gets into the playoff conversation, I'm betting on Louisville. I'm just not sold on the ceiling being the 6th best team in the league. I feel like it's more 7 or 8, which isn't all that far off from where they are right now. You just got to find kind of something to build around. And I think that's part of Louisville's problem right now is it's just nothing's bad. They're kind of in the middle of the pack of everything. But when you're in the middle of the pack, you leave yourself open to these kind of the fluctuations and the weird results not going your way. And all of a sudden, you've got 12 points from 11 games. Then the Chicago Red Stars, they've given up twice as many goals as they've scored, and they have scored 14, which means they are far and away the worst defensive team in the league. They've lost half of the 6 home games they've played. Obviously, this all comes with what happened with Mallory Swanson. If you needed further justification for her MVP candidacy, here you go. I am slightly surprised the issues have been so extreme on the defensive side, considering all of the attacking and midfield pieces this team lost. But also, that midfield plays a huge role in making sure you're on the same page with that back line, and they rebuilt the entire thing this offseason. And so you just feel for them. It's just kind of an unfortunate series of events. It's just one thing after another. And look, despite the goal difference, they're still within striking distance. This can turn around. I certainly don't see it turning around, but they're hanging in there at least. And then you got your last 2 teams. Angel City, another disappointing start to the season. There's so much hype, so much excitement. San Diego Wave doing so well, and it just kind of hasn't happened for Angel City yet. However, you look at the teams that they're going to have to catch to get into the playoff mix. Those teams don't have a trio of Julie Ertz, Sydney Leroux, and Alyssa Thompson. Alyssa Thompson has been sensational. I'm not convinced that pick and that move to make sure that they got her is getting enough credit. That is your cornerstone for the next decade. And she has proven it right away. And with the San Diego team that already, had Alex Morgan and then landed Naomi Girma, you needed that piece to build around and to say, this is Angel City moving forward. And you've gotten it. Alyssa Thompson has been everything she was advertised as. So you add that, because right now you have a teenager carrying your team. That is not how this is supposed to work. But Sydney Leroux comes back. Julie Ertz getting added into the mix. Will it be too late? It's entirely possible. But if there's a team that is going to go on a tear in the second half of the season, to me it is Angel City. Because you can easily talk yourself into a world where the last 8 games of the season, all 3 of those players are starting and they're a completely different team. And you catch a couple breaks along the way, and all of a sudden, you're taking 20 plus points from your final 8 games, and you're back in the playoff conversation at the very least, if not actually in the playoffs. So it's got the unfortunate thing about this short season, and the World Cup in there as well, in terms of Julie Ertz probably, is you just don't have time to kind of let this thing build and figure it out like you do in MLS. You're 8 points back right now. It's not over yet. But you don't have another 10 games to let Julie Ertz get integrated after the World Cup. The results have to start coming to make sure that you don't completely eliminate yourself before, hypothetically, when you're going to be at your best with all these players back, full fitness, game shape, all of those kind of things. And then perhaps the biggest surprise from an unpleasant standpoint so far this season, Kansas City Current down at the bottom also on 9 points. I did not expect it to go this way. I did kind of encourage people to slow down a little bit on the Current until you actually saw this team on the field and what they could do. And because it was easy to talk, and I bought into the roster. It was easy to get excited about that roster. And your only real addition that's making a significant impact is Dabinia. And this is a team that was good, not great last season, struggled to score goals. And certainly I did not expect them to be here. To me, even if you just added the Bina, that's at the very least, a playoff team. But all of a sudden, you're halfway through the season with 0 wins from 4 road games and 4 losses in your 7 home games. That's the other part of this, is they've got that flip the second half of the season. They have already played 7 times at home and got 9 points. It would be really, really impressive to me if they found a way to finish any higher than 9th, 10th. And yes, they're only 4 points back of Orlando right now. But you had the home games. You haven't gotten what you expected from all of your new players. And so here they are. And it's another reminder of what makes this league so great, which is the parity. You just get a couple, whether it's an injury, player not producing the way you expect, 1 or 2 things just go the wrong way, and all of a sudden you go from being one of the favorites to one of the worst teams in the league. And that's not just Kansas City, that could go for anybody. Washington Spirit last year too. Had that incredibly long stretch where they couldn't win a game, and here they are tied up top of the table. You just never know, and you need so many things to go right, especially when you don't have 3 or 4 players who can carry your team at any given moment. To me, that's really the theme of this season so far. Because you look at the top of that table, and San Diego have been fairly healthy. We know what the Spirit have. The Thorns, same thing. You've got plenty of options there. OL Reign doing fine without Rose Lavelle. Right? Does it take you from being the best team in the league to the 4th best team in the league if you lose a Rose Lavelle, if you lose a Sophia Smith, if you lose an Alex Morgan, Ashley Sanchez, whoever? Yeah. But it doesn't cost you a playoff spot when you have those other quality players that are some of the best players in the league to cover up for that. That's the issues you're seeing. And Gotham have been pretty good without Mitch Purse as well. That's the difference. Kansas City, even with Dabinia, they lacked those high-end difference makers last season and haven't really added enough, even with all these additions that they were supposed to get all this production from. Angel City, you lose Christian Press. All of a sudden, you're back, and you lose Sydney Leroux, and Julie Ertz is working her way back, and you're right there near the bottom of the table. Chicago, lose Mallory Swanson. There you go. The margins are that thin. It's what makes this league great, and that's what you've seen so far this season. That is my NWSL check-in. I'm going to take my first break. When I come back, winners, losers of the European season, which clubs should be most excited, happy about the way things went, which should be the most disappointed. I will talk about all of that next. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. It is time for my annual winners and losers segment, looking back on the European season and the teams that should feel the best about how things went and the teams that should be the most disappointed. Winner number one, surprise, surprise, Napoli. Napoli won Serie A by 16 points without trying for the final month of the season. They didn't just win the league, which in and of itself would have been, made them one of these three winners and, been historic for how long it had been one of the stories of the season. It would be the story had Manchester City not won the treble. But they did it by making the rest of the league look bad, which makes them even more of a winner. And they did it in a season that was supposed to be a transition. It is so easy to forget where this team started back in August. Dries Mertens, Lorenzo Insigne, Kalidou Koulibaly. 3 legends of the club. And still, to varying degrees, but important players. All gone. They didn't even rebuild. They tore it down and built something better in essentially one transfer window. And I know not every key contributor to this team was acquired in this one transfer window, but it's remarkable what they did. And I continue to go back to the point that they're going to lose players. Osimhen might be gone this summer. But to be able to identify replacements for the players that they have lost and to build a team that is getting contributions from so many players allows you to survive losing the players who are ultimately going to leave. To me, it's the pinnacle in the sense that nobody can expect them to have another season like this. And you can't expect them to go replace these players the same way they did the previous version. But from a Napoli era standpoint, to me, this can absolutely be the beginning rather than the end. Does that mean they're competing for a Serie A title every season? Not necessarily. But you can consistently be in the Champions League. Maybe make a Champions League run out of it. And also, there just isn't anybody that scares you in this league. They're going to be up there even if they lose a piece or two. Does that mean they can, again, I'm not convinced they can replicate it or make it any better than this season. But there's every chance they can go back and be a top 2 team in the league, top 10 team in the world, that kind of thing. But really, this is just about them making the rest of the league look bad and kind of propping Serie A up for most of the season. They are the winner, full stop, of the season, in my opinion. Loser number 1, unsurprisingly, Chelsea. The managerial changes didn't work. Frank Lampard's reputation is in tatters. But more than that, you have a very troubling combination that was the end result of this season. And this is the biggest reason out of the many reasons to choose from why they're the biggest loser for me. This team didn't qualify for a European competition. Think about how many players are not expecting to just be part of the squad, but expecting to be starters regularly next season. You don't pay all the money they paid for all of these guys and then have them be content sitting on the bench. They need to make deep runs in both domestic cups to have any chance of giving guys the playing time they want. And even then, I don't think they can. And to me, that is the question with Mauricio Pochettino. And I wrote about this in my 5 things from the week. I don't have any questions about him and his ability to work and with and develop these kind of young players that Chelsea have brought in. That is exactly what he did at Tottenham. He is excellent at it. My concern is these are not the same kind of guys he was working with at Spurs. These aren't Harry Kane, who was on a couple, loans to random championship teams and nobody really expected anything from. These are the highest profile young players in the world. And this is an owner who has already fired Thomas Tuchel and Graham Potter and will be on manager number 4 once Pochettino actually manages a game. Is Poch going to get the time he needs? Because this is it's a dumpster fire. Now, it's one that could be put out very quickly. But you have got to come into this expecting that it's going to take time. If you want all of these young players who are clearly not where they need to be to develop, you have to take the lumps along the way and actually pick a manager to stick with. Poch is as good a choice as anybody. And the second part of that equation is these players need to buy into what Poch is selling because he is a terrific motivator, terrific man manager for a specific type of player. I would argue his group at Chelsea is closer to the one at PSG. That didn't go very well. The egos became a problem. Now, again, we're not talking about Neymar and Mbappe here. But these are players who feel entitled because Chelsea sent the message that they were entitled. And now you have too many of them where they're all battling with each other because there isn't enough playing time. There aren't enough spots in the 11. Keeping all of them happy and focused is going to be a tremendous challenge. So my theme for Chelsea next season and just moving forward is that Poch can do this and get Chelsea to where Chelsea expect to be. But everybody has to let him. That means Todd Boehly. That means the players. A lot of this is out of his control. Because you can't just snap your fingers and fix this stuff. If you could, one of these guys who managed this team would have been able to figure it out. It goes beyond just the embarrassment of the season with all of the money spent. It's also about the situation you now find yourself in where you have this super expensive squad that is way too big with a bunch of guys who are unhappy, trying to figure out who's going to get sold, who's not. And it's just not a sustainable way to operate. And to me, if you want to get the most out of these young guys, Poch is a terrific choice. That part of it makes sense. It's just a question of whether this turns into more like the Spurs situation, where everybody gets behind him, or more like the PSG situation, where he was just never able to build those relationships the way he needed to and connect with those guys to get them to be invested in what he was trying to do. He's capable. Everybody has to let him actually get the most out of this team, though. Winner number 2, Lens. Didn't talk about them very much this season. They weren't in European competition. They came close in the end to catching PSG, but it was kind of a series of events that unfolded. They were always within striking distance, but never really threatening. And they ended the season on this incredible winning streak. And so they closed the gap, but it was still over with a game to spare, all of that kind of stuff. That's not why they're here, though. They're here, though, because not only was this club, recently not even in Ligue 1, they haven't played in the Champions League in 20 years. They haven't played in European competition in 15, if I did the math right. It's remarkable. And it's one of those stories that would have gotten more attention if you didn't have the title race in the Bundesliga, and you didn't have Napoli, and you didn't have Arsenal, and you didn't have the treble. And you didn't have all the drama with PSG this season. And you didn't have Union Berlin doing something similar in the Bundesliga. It's just the unfortunate reality of being the 5th league. But this is Lon's team, who have been good since they came back up, and obviously took it to a whole nother level this season. The big question going into next season will be if you can keep Lois Openda. He was sensational. I think it was 21 goals he scored in Ligue 1. I could have that number slightly off. That is kind of your tipping point in terms of, I mean, he's going to go eventually. He's one of the most promising young strikers in Europe at this point. But it's that interesting situation where you also are providing the opportunity to play in the Champions League. Now, of course, there are plenty of other clubs who could also offer him that opportunity, but you're not in a rush to make that sale because you're still on the upward trajectory. You haven't gotten the fruits of your labor this season yet. And if you're going to the Champions League, you want your really, really good striker to stay. And so that's going to be an interesting thing to monitor. Regardless, they're in a really good spot. This is also one of those things, though, where, how much can you hold on to? Not only how much of this team can you hold on to, but can you sustain it year after year? Because what we've seen a lot from the other Ligue 1 teams, not named Marseille, and I guess primarily Lyon to a certain extent, when you think of kind of the other really exciting Ligue 1 teams that have gotten into the Champions League, that Monaco team, that Stade Rennes team, they kind of got dismantled immediately and the club was never the same. Can Lens avoid that happening? You're going to lose pieces along the way at some point, whether that's this summer or later on. But can you back it up? Can you deal with the added games? All of that kind of stuff. Because this was just quite simply one of the best seasons in club history. Not the best, but pretty close. Loser number 2, going back to the Premier League with Tottenham. There are just very few positives to point to. I mean, you're not playing a European competition. Again, multiple managers dismissed. Cups didn't go particularly great. Congratulations, you got to the knockout stage of the Champions League and then didn't do anything. Right, even Chelsea had a Champions League run to point to. Spurs didn't even really have that. And by the way, they almost didn't even get out of the group. And it was a group that they should have won with ease. Then you got the Harry Kane stuff. But more than any of that, this season was a reminder and made it clear that they are as far as they have been from reaching the heights that Mauricio Pochettino led them to. Because I always tried to trick myself into believing they're kind of one step away and they have the squad to do it. And they have the manager to do it, whether that was Mourinho or specifically Antonio Conte. And it's clear that that was just incorrect. And it has just continued to get worse and worse to the point where they're not even getting into the Champions League. They're no longer in Europe because they're getting exposed by the Newcastles and Brightons of this world who are just running better operations. I talked about the hiring of Ange Postecoglou last week. Go check out that video if you haven't seen it already. I'm all in on it. But it's time to reset expectations. I'm not falling for this anymore. And that's whether Harry Kane stays or leaves. They are falling behind everybody else. And so to me, this is what I talked about with Postecoglou. It's not about trying to make the Champions League. It's not about trying to somehow get to this level that was supposed to be the next evolution where you're competing for Premier League titles. It's not even about winning a trophy. It's about getting your fans back on board and getting people to believe in your team again. Because everybody, and playing in a way that actually gets Spurs fans excited. Because everybody was just so over this whole Mourinho, Conte, Nuno era. That's the first part. Then you can actually get to the trying to win trophies, trying to build. But they've even lost the kind of the heart and soul aspect, which is the downside to hiring guys like Mourinho and Conte when it doesn't go well. And so that's where I kind of left this season thinking about, is you got to rebuild this thing kind of from the ground up. Not necessarily from a squad standpoint. Obviously, they need improvements there too. But just from a club identity standpoint. Get back to who you are and this quote-unquote Spurs DNA that Daniel Levy talked about and then never did anything to back up. Get fans excited again and feeling like there's something to cheer for. And Postecoglou can give you all of that. Get the players confident again. But that doesn't get you to where Spurs expect to be. And at the same time, that's what has to happen first before you can even start thinking about that other stuff. Staying in England for my final winner, I cheated a little bit and just made it the top 4 in the Premier League. And even then, I felt a little bit bad because Brighton and Aston Villa deserve honorable mentions here. So I'm going to talk about them briefly first. I mean, Brighton, it's the best season in club history. Aston Villa, to me, Unai Emery's the manager of the season. To get back into Europe with where they were, absolutely remarkable. So, honorable mention to those two. But then you look at the top 4 itself. Because I originally had Arsenal, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized it just needs to be all 4 of these teams. I mean, I was not going to put Manchester City because I only have 3, but they did win a treble, and they did finally win the Champions League. They're pretty big winners. The other 3 are more who I want to talk about, though. For Arsenal, I will say this one more time. You can call it choking or throwing the Premier League title away. You can be disappointed that things went the way they did. Although I find it odd that you can simultaneously talk about City's inevitability and that, but that's a different conversation. What you can't do is call this season a failure. Failures are related to expectations. If you would have told Arsenal fans you would have been back in the Champions League comfortably, looking like legitimate title challengers, with a young, promising group of players who are really easy to get behind and who feel like they have a real connection to this club, taking it 100 times out of 100. Therefore, Arsenal is a massive winner this season. And also just taking that step from Champions League hopeful to clearly one of the teams at the top of the Premier League pecking order moving forward. Does that mean they're ever going to win a Premier League and that, this young group is going to get better and eventually 2-3 years they're going to find a way to knock off Manchester City? Not necessarily. There's an argument that's going to be the best from a point standpoint, from a performance standpoint, the best it's going to get. Just because of how difficult it is to stay with the top teams in this league. I'm not entirely convinced that will be the case, but it's one of those situations where progress is not going to be linear. At the same time, though, you already have this team that should easily qualify for the Champions League, that should easily reach the knockout stage of the Champions League, and now you're talking about who can you add to it. When you get this kind of progress and these kind of results, it adds that ambition and convinces the Cronkies to go say, okay, we're close. When we spend money, we actually get results for it. There's a benefit that you can see. There is improvement. So let's go get a Declan Rice. We're going to have to actually see who ends up signing before start making sweeping declarations about Arsenal's transfer window. But right, there's the excitement, there's the buzz, there's the belief that this is a terrific team. And players want to be here, which makes it appealing for somebody like Declan Rice to be with all these guys he's also with on the England team. And you don't see any of them going anywhere. Ramsdale, Saka, Odegaard. That is all stuff that nobody would have believed at the end of last season. And 12 months later, here we are. Then Manchester United. A strange season, up and down season. Again, I wouldn't have individually made them a winner. I would have put at least two of these three other teams ahead of them. But they fit the category that I'm going for here. They found a manager, they won a trophy. Again, if you would have laid that part out after those first two games of the Premier League season, I certainly wouldn't have believed you. I don't think many other people would have either. And oh, by the way, they made the final of another cup too. Massive step forward. Again, it's not where they want to be, where they expect to be. There are holes in that squad that need to be addressed. But you take it every single time. And Erik ten Hag, to me, is the guy. And that was one of the biggest parts of this is, and I guess this is how I'll summarize it. There were these teases that United were back, but it never really carried over. It was 7 games, and then they had that terrible stretch again, right? The Ole at the wheel, kind of up and down roller coaster. And yes, this season had some roller coaster elements to it, but to me, it's very clear that Manchester United are back. That this is real. They were too good for too long, too much of the season. Not perfect, not at Manchester City or Arsenal's level, but back to where they are a factor where you go into seasons expecting them to be top 4. Not, I could talk myself into them finishing 6th because I just don't really believe this in their United. This is a different conversation. Ten Hag has done the hardest part, which is changing that culture and changing the vibe around the club, right? All the stuff that Spurs need to fix right now. That was United before Ten Hag. Now you're talking about what can we do to get this team to the next level? That's an exciting place to be. And then, of course, Newcastle. It's another one of those weird spots where I don't have too much to say about the ownership part of this. It's concerning, it's problematic, it needs to be part of the story. I just don't know how to analyze it any further than that. What I can talk about is that Newcastle now have this combination of money, as concerning as that money is, and a manager. Because the story here is both. I said coming into this season, I believed what happened under Eddie Howe at the end of last year was real. It just baffles me that this guy is not viewed as one of the best managers in the Premier League and somehow kind of lost his reputation because Bournemouth eventually got relegated. The one time kind of everything went badly for them. And at the same time, he now has, and this is why to me he was the perfect guy for this job. Again, whether, the questions about the money aside, you give him those kind of financial resources with his coaching ability, and this was going to be the end result. He is getting the most out of, and this is probably oversold to a certain extent, but it is important to recognize that it's not like he has a group of superstars out there. He got a couple really good players from the transfer market. Bruno Guimaraes, Sven Botman. They were able to add Nick Pope, who was really good in net. Obviously, Kieran Trippier. But you still got a lot of Joe Lintons, Callum Wilsons, Sean Longstaffs, Miguel Almirones, Jacob Murphys, Dan Burns. And his team's playing in the Champions League next season. You don't look at that team and say that's one of the 4 best squads in the Premier League. No way. But they got the money to give themselves the opportunity, and then they got the manager who's actually going to elevate those players. And the combination worked perfectly. And so now comes the next part where it gets even more uncomfortable, which is now that they have Champions League money, now that this is working even faster than anybody thought, what happens next? You're hearing James Madison. You're hearing Nicolo Barella. And now all of a sudden you're talking about something on a whole nother level where it's getting closer to that Manchester City conversation of, look, other teams just can't do this. But they're not there yet. I don't think anybody's particularly intimidated by this current squad. Got some really good players in there, but also have a lot of players who are getting elevated and playing their best thanks to Eddie Howe. But ultimately, it comes down to this. For better or for worse, and certainly I would argue for worse, it's a Big Seven. You cannot have a conversation about the Big Six and then leave Newcastle out at this point. That's what this season showed. Because they are, with the help of new ownership, I mean, they're past Spurs, still not past United, Arsenal, and Chelsea is kind of a difficult situation. But, you know, they're not past United, they're not past Arsenal, they're not past City. They're certainly in a better spot than Spurs, and right now they're in a better spot than Chelsea. It's not just that they're one of the hopefuls to try and get those Europa League spots or something. They are here just like everybody expected them to be once that ownership change got made. But they are here now. That's what this season showed, and so they are a winner. Finally, going back to Italy to round out with loser number 3, Juventus. Had some different options here. But the more I thought about it, the more I really decided Juventus was the right choice. Even without the points deduction, they would have come in 4th with 0 trophies. So this is not just about the points deduction, although it is certainly partially about the points deduction. The way it was handled with the applying it, taking it back, then adding the new one right at the end of the season, the uncertainty that came with that. It was just not a fun season for Juventus. That's part of this. But then there's the other parts too. 5 Italian clubs won a trophy, played in a European final, or reached the semifinals of the Champions League this season. Napoli won the league. Inter Milan won the other 2 domestic trophies and reached the Champions League final. AC Milan reached the Champions League semis. Roma played in the Europa League final. Fiorentina played in the Conference League final. None of those teams were Juventus. Juventus also had the Europa League open up for them when Sevilla knocked off Manchester United. And they couldn't get past Sevilla, who then went on to win the tournament. That would have put them in the Champions League rather than the Conference League. And all of this goes back to the biggest point of all, which I've kind of mentioned with Napoli, but it specifically applies to Juventus and kind of the reverse. Nobody is scared of them right now, which is incredible to think about considering where we were, 5 years ago when they had a stranglehold on the league. And it started with that Pirlo decision, and it's just kind of gone downhill from there. They are another team trying to make the Champions League at this point. And you like their chances too. Again, they would have this season. It would have been close, but they would have without the punishment. But even think about how their Champions League campaign went. It was embarrassing. There is just nothing, if you're Inter, if you're AC Milan, if you're Napoli, if you're Lazio, if you're Roma, if you're Atalanta, there's just nothing scary about Juventus. And that's why I felt so strongly they had to be a loser here. They're just another one of the top teams in Italy. And this season was proof of that. They found themselves in the Europa League. Couldn't even win that. They were just in the top 4 battle. Were never title contenders. Had some good, had some bad. Bad Champions League campaign. This is just who they are right now. And it's hard to see it changing in the short term, even if everything in terms of the punishments is normal. It's not like that cost them a league title or something. They're just another good Italian team that sometimes will have better seasons than others, it feels like. And you look at that squad and you just don't see that many players that really, really impress you. Like past teams. There aren't many superstars there. The best players in Serie A don't play for Juventus. They play for Napoli. Could argue they play for Lazio. They play for AC Milan in the case of Rafa Leao and Theo Hernandez. They play for Inter in the case of, your Barellas, Lautaro Martinez, etc. That's where Juventus are. That's why they're one of my losers. That is all for that segment. Going to take one more quick break and come back with the weekend look ahead. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Going to jump right into the weekend look ahead and try and make this rather quick. 3 different kind of portions to get to here. First, internationally, what is happening over this international break? Nations League. UEFA first. Croatia advancing in extra time today against the Netherlands. They will face the winner of Spain and Italy on Sunday. Again, I'm focusing just on the weekend. Spain and Italy play tomorrow. So your UEFA Nations League final is Sunday. Croatia participating, waiting to see who they will face. Then CONCACAF Nations League. USA Mexico coming up on Thursday night. Winner of that game faces the winner of Panama and Canada again on Sunday for the CONCACAF Nations League title. And then a couple other games I wanted to highlight from Euro 2024 qualifying. All kinds of UEFA things going on. Still don't understand this whole qualification for 4 bazillion different things. But teams are playing Euro 2024 qualifiers. Couple interesting ones on Sunday. Scotland at Norway. Austria at Belgium are kind of your highest profile matchups. And then one friendly I wanted to mention, Germany will travel to Poland on Friday. If you're looking for kind of a good matchup of high-profile players, that's outside of the Nations League, that's probably your best bet. Then, Major League Soccer. Not a full weekend because of the international break, but some games happening and some pretty good ones. RSL at DC United. Perhaps a debut for Chicho Arango. We'll have to wait and see. Orlando at New England. St. Louis at Nashville. To me, that's the most interesting game of the weekend. Both teams right there near the top of the table. And then LAFC at Kansas City. LAFC struggling since, even kind of before the CONCACAF Champions League final, at least the second leg, still hasn't gone great. Just got battered by Houston. And this is a Kansas City team that's clicking into gear, finally healthy, got their best players on the field, Really looking forward to that one as well. And then NWSL. Speaking of looking forward to, Angel City at San Diego Wave on Saturday. This can kind of get the spotlight now that you don't have any of your Nations League finals. European season is over. This is one of the games in terms of soccer on Saturday. Always great when these two teams meet. And I talked about this before. Angel City needs to start putting points on the board. San Diego Wave trying to secure the Shield. Halfway point of the season, getting to the business end here. Really looking forward to that one. Then you got OL Reign at Houston on Saturday. Your best matchup from a standing standpoint. And then Washington Spirit at Kansas City Current on Sunday. Again, this Current team has talent, so many expectations. It has not gone well at all. If they're going to do something, just like Angel City, it's got to start now. You're halfway through the season. And Washington Spirit, similar story to San Diego Wave, right there, competing for the Shield, home field advantage, a bye, all of those things. So, good week in the NWSL. That is all for the weekend look ahead. That is all for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in.